Welcome to Private Capital Insiders, where we dive deep with leaders transforming private markets through data, technology, and operational excellence. I'm your host, Frank Scarpelli, and today I'm excited to welcome Dr. Benjamin Herndon, whose career spans more than 30 years at the forefront of analytics and organizational transformation. Ben was the very first chief analytics officer at the IRS, driving modernization in one of the world's largest public sector organizations. He then moved into the private sector as director of AI and strategy at Vista Equity Partners, advising leading portfolio companies on leveraging the power of data science and artificial intelligence for real results. And now he serves as chief strategy officer at Kungfu.AI, working with both enterprises and private equity firms to accelerate AI adoption and deliver sustainable value. In today's episode, we'll explore what it really takes to embed AI at the heart of value creation in both private equity-backed and enterprise environments. We'll get into the real-world challenges of adoption, the hidden cultural and organizational levers that drive transformation, and how top investors and executives separate hype from meaningful impact. Whether you're leading digital change, investing in technology-driven growth, or seeking practical insights from someone who's built AI success at scale, this is an episode you're not going to want to miss. Let's get into it. Ben, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. I appreciate you having me, Frank. Yeah, my background is in really organizational transformation. In the early days, when I was doing that, in the early 90s, it was more focused on, emerging network and then internet, and then sort of rolling into e-commerce technologies. And I just got really interested in, how companies make effective decisions when it comes to new technologies. And AI obviously is one of those. And so I did a PhD on that topic. I was a research professor at Georgia Tech and been doing it all my career. Very fascinated by it.
Yeah. And in terms of patterns in AI transformation, you've had a fascinating journey from transforming, I guess, the IRS as their first chief analytics officer to driving AI strategy for Vista Equity Partners, and now, leading with Kung Fu. So what patterns do you see in terms of how organizations, whether they're the government agencies, PE-backed companies, how do they struggle with or succeed at AI transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a couple of things I've seen and a couple of things that I think are critical to success. The biggest one is a lot of organizations and companies tend to think about AI only as a point solution, right? There's a problem or there's an opportunity. Let's go do AI on that. But particularly when you're talking about an organization the size of the IRS and a lot of our current bigger, more complex clients like Fortune 200 public companies, they have to really think about how to organize for AI. Right? It's not just about doing it. It's really about changing, all those components of leadership, org structure, hiring, compensation, and retention that are required to, effectively do AI over time and at scale.
Right. Can you share any?
Oh, I was just going to say, there's a couple of other things that I've seen that are pretty consistent. One is it's always challenging to estimate or accurately estimate, I should say, the requirements of what doing AI is, right? So what's the expected ROI from from a specific opportunity? What's required to do it? How do you navigate challenges that legacy, especially when you're dealing with legacy organizations that didn't grow up in AI? How do you modify their risk tolerances to be able to lean into AI because it's fundamentally a different, probabilistic technology. And one of the biggest things I see is an underestimation of the challenge associated with adoption and cultural integration, right? The company at large, if these things aren't picked up either by employees or by customers, it's not going to go anywhere. And if the company as a whole doesn't start thinking about how to identify and take it and leverage AI opportunities, those are never going to rise to the surface.
There's a huge change management component to that, isn't there?
Massive.
I'm wondering, do you have any interesting examples that you might talk about, like a turning point or particular pivot?
A couple, the biggest one, and I'll speak in somewhat general terms, is sort of the urgency associated with AI, right? There's so much hype. Everybody's so excited to do it. that I saw this at the IRS. I've seen this with other companies that we work for. And, the rush to do something because you're worried you're going to get left behind, or, you want to maintain your competitive advantage. You'll see people go really fast with the technology, put it into practice, put it out in the marketplace, and they have failed to appreciate, again, what are the adoption requirements? What are the potential risks associated with it? A great
Yeah.
example, we had a client who pushed out AI technologies in their existing software products, and they didn't change anything about customer training or support. And so all of a sudden they got flooded with all these tickets of people saying, "Oh, your software's broken." And it was all because they really just didn't understand the AI, right? It was making recommendations. They were like, "It's not making recommendations the way that I would make them, so it's broken." And then, they tried to be responsive, and they'd spin up a lot of engineering effort and resources to fix it, but they weren't fixing the fundamental problem.
Right, right. Interesting. So from experiment to value creation levers, so you were at the epicenter, I guess you could say, of one of the most successful PE firms leveraging data and AI. Can you walk us through how AI moves from being a nice to have technology experiment to a genuine value creation lever that impacts enterprise value?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing I would say is, don't focus on, checking a box, right? Because
Hmm.
especially back when I was at Vista, AI was still somewhat new, and a lot of companies were like, "Oh, we just need to quote unquote do AI, and then we can call ourselves, having AI," because that's sort of, what they viewed as, moving the needle. But the companies that were really successful were much more transformative, right? They were approaching the application of artificial intelligence, either from a how do we fundamentally rethink our business and our processes given this new opportunity, and how do we do this at scale across the company? So it's not just about one AI solution or one AI
Hmm.
product. It's, how do we create an engine that's going to put AI into 20 products and embed AI in our finance and operations and human capital areas, right? All those things where there were opportunities to advance.
And when you're making a shift like that in the business, are there specific signs that leaders should look for that signal this shift?
You mean to be able to identify, like, when is it happening, or
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, again, I think it's very much cultural, right? It's, everybody in the organization understands that the company is now committed to leaning into this disruption. So it's not just, over there and the purview of the chief technology officer or the chief product officer. It's really everybody leaning into it. And it's the company, in, again, investing in it in a way that sometimes gets lost when you're looking at just a point solution and you're saying, "Oh, well, it's not going to take that much to put it into production." But putting 100 models into production and managing them all across the life cycle has very unique organizational and operational requirements.
Very unique perspective. We don't always find private capital, private equity firms paying as much attention to the culture aspect, the people aspect, the change management aspect. Sometimes it's due to the horizon, but with these holding periods protracting as they have been, um, we're seeing it in our practice. There's a lot more attention paid to some of these critical issues that you bring up because you keep on getting back to the organizational aspect of things. I think that's really key and important.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that, I did at Vista and that I do currently is I do diligence on companies that, claim to be AI forward, AI transformed, whatever you want to call it. Um,
Hmm.
and really understanding what's the difference between someone that, again, just has a bunch of AI and somebody who's really doing it, well at scale, and being able to identify those things and understand, okay, that's how I would value this company based on its ability to sustain and accelerate that trajectory is definitely, a critical component, not just in private equity, but with a lot of, when we work
Yeah.
currently for a lot of private equity clients, private equity owned clients, and they're very aware of the same kinds of dynamics.
Yeah, interesting. So when we were reviewing your session preview, it was indicating that AI helps with early identification of scaling constraints. So most PE firms only discover these constraints when they're already limiting growth. Can you share how predictive analytics is changing the dynamic, like maybe an anecdote or a case where it made a decisive difference?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say as much that AI isn't needed to help identify when and under what conditions you're going to bump up under your scaling constraints, right? I mean, basic statistics and forecasting can do that. But if you're smart about it and in 6 months, if we continue to grow at this rate, we're going to bump up against this inability for us to continue to grow, then you can forward invest in the application of artificial intelligence, either to speed up processes, improve quality, enhance productivity, or in some cases, fully automate processes. We worked with a company in the factoring industry, and when they initially came to us, they were like, hey, we want to use data and AI to help our people make better decisions. And we really opened their eyes to the opportunity to automate almost 70% of their factoring decisions. What that did, in this context, they didn't want to let go of their people because they had grand aspirations to grow and scale. And now they orient those people in that direction and actually have them looking more at new clients, more at potentially risky purchases, more at analyzing why they realize bad outcomes when they do.
That's really interesting. So, in terms of the session itself that's coming up in Austin, the session is supposed to highlight the finance, engineering, and customer success aspects. So, from that Vista experience, which of these typically offers like the fastest path to demonstrable ROI?
Yeah. Obviously, Vista being focused as they are on enterprise software, I would say engineering especially. But that's also an area, I mean, we're a management consulting and engineering firm, which means, we have a team of absolutely cutting edge, best in the world AI and machine learning engineers. And that's all we do is help companies leverage, their proprietary data or other, data sources to develop truly bespoke AI solutions. And those are the things that really move the needle, right? I mean, that's where you see massive ROI, massive disruption of industries and markets. But, it's also about how you use those technologies in your own engineering efforts. So whether it's personal productivity or code assistance or whatever, being able to accelerate your time to value through smarter engineering is absolutely another way to improve ROI.
Gotcha. So data-driven execution, that could mean everything and at the same time, nothing, right? So in your view, what does true data-driven execution look like when you're trying to scale a $50 million company to 200 million in a few years?
Yeah, sort of to the point I made earlier, you have to look forward to what is going to be required to make that scale happen. And assuming that you're not thinking just in terms of, oh, we need to hire another person to do another job, you have to be forward looking to, how are we going to use data to essentially get out of that linear scale constraint. And, there are a few areas that I think are absolutely critical, right? One is data quality. Data quality is critical for any artificial intelligence engineering. But as you start thinking about, where we're going to be, when we're 200 million, you have to expect that things can get sloppy when you're growing that fast. And you don't want that to translate into your data. So even if you start with great data quality, if there's an erosion of that quality as you grow and scale, it's going to have an adverse impact on your ability to leverage artificial intelligence against that scale. Also, data engineering, what a smaller company might be able to do in terms of putting data sets together and building artificial intelligence on top of them will look very different when you're 5 times the size, 10 times the size. So forward investing in the infrastructure and architecture to be able to make sure that data is accessible and applicable when it is time. And then,
good point.
Yeah. And then finally, one that I'm particularly fond of is really a forward-looking data strategy, right? Most of us think that data strategy is how we manage the data we currently have, right? But data strategy really needs to be what are our data needs going to be when we're 10 times? And that may mean that we have to think about acquiring different data, acquiring companies that have access to data or that are data brokers to expand our footprint. And that's also, that applies not just on customer facing opportunities, but operational opportunities as well.
We look at the same thing in our practice when we're in the selection process and hiring leaders. It's like, this is going to resonate with everybody already, but I'll just repeat it for the sake of, but you don't want to hire the person for where you are today, but where you want to be in 3 or 4 years. And
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm wondering, you mentioned infrastructure requirements and the maybe potential lack of planning. So, I mean, are there certain areas that firms tend to underestimate at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is, time to value, right? Most companies, and I think this relates to your point earlier about, a lot of private equity backed companies don't realize they're hitting a scale problem until they hit it head on. Most people don't realize they have a data engineering or architecture problem until they bump up against it. And then, the lead times can be long on these kind of foundational investments, right? The old adage, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The second best time is today. I would say, don't wait until today is your only option. Because, as you again grow and scale and your data gets more diverse and exists in more places, if you're not forward thinking about making sure that that investment is in place when you reach those points, you'll be playing catch up.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So you've seen it all. You've seen these implementations that scale across numerous portfolio companies. It sounds like your current practice is focusing on that specifically, if I'm right. So
Um,
from your,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to clarify, we really work across a full range of activities. So we do some work that is entirely focused on like change management, strategic direction, et cetera, all the way down to very bespoke engineering applications. So have one that was just, I think, passed through oh, sorry, I blanked on it. Anyway, it just was approved for application in clinics and hospitals to predict breast cancer risk. So not actually predict the emergence, but predict where it will emerge.
Interesting. So based on what you've seen, what's the biggest gap between what GPs expect AI to deliver and what actually happens in that first year of implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would really say it comes down to a misestimation of the portfolio company's readiness. And this is something that we currently encounter with a lot of our clients, right? They'll come to us and they'll say, our data's in great shape, we have a great team, we're committed. And then you start working with them and you realize none of those things are as true as they were represented. And that has, not just implications for technically how quickly you can move, but also organizationally, like we were talking before, what needs to change for this effort to succeed. If you didn't take into account that you have to change how your customer success organization works to support this, then that's an added cost, right? So basically what that adds up to is costs get bigger, time to value goes out, the original ROI case starts to fall apart, and then particularly in the private equity world, you start to get a lot of questions about why we're not where we thought we were going to be and how long is it going to be and does that fit
Yeah,
within our hold period?
absolutely. Your upcoming session promises a lot of real world applications and case studies. So without giving too much away, what's one counterintuitive insight about AI and operational excellence that you think will challenge conventional private equity wisdom?
I think the historical wisdom has been that, things move at a certain pace. And,
Mm.
if you acquire a company, there are things that you can do with and to that company, during the hold period to improve its valuation. But you also, can be a tendency to assume that the industry isn't going to change materially. But the pace of disruption that we're seeing as a result of AI is unprecedented. And so I think it's going to challenge that presumption. In other words, like, you may have purchased a company or, done a combination or a bolt-on based on certain assumptions coming out of the initial investment hypothesis. If AI has fundamentally started to disrupt the industry, you may have to throw that investment hypothesis out the window within, 3 to 4 years if that's your hold period.
Right, right. Really interesting. And thanks really for these insights. It really kind of sets up what the session is going to be like. And I know the audience is going to get a lot out of that session. We hope that they join us in Austin. Really appreciate you joining us, sharing your experience. Why don't you tell our audience how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, my email is pretty easy. I'm benjamin.herndon at kungfu.ai. Please feel free to email or reach out. You can also find us online at kungfu.ai and welcome any and all conversations.
Great. We're really looking forward to meeting you in person. We'll be down there with our our best on and looking forward to having some of that Austin barbecue we had last time we were there.
I love that. Sounds great. I look forward to it as well.
It's crazy. Terry Clark's, right?
Terry Black's is one.
Terry Black's. Oh yeah.
Franklin's is the most famous.
Okay, noted.
It's delicious.
Okay. You may have to join us.
I will absolutely join you.
Thanks again. We'll see you.
Thanks. Take care.
So that wraps up another episode of Private Capital Insiders, brought to you by Private Capital Global. And a huge thank you to Dr. Benjamin Herndon for sharing his deep experience and candid insights spanning public sector and retake. That wraps up another episode of Private Capital Insiders, brought to you by Private Capital Global. A huge thank you to Dr. Benjamin Herndon for sharing his deep experience and candid insights spanning public sector analytics, private equity strategy, and the real-world impact of AI transformation. Today's conversation highlighted that true value creation, whether enterprise level or private equity portfolios, depends on more than just technology. Culture, leadership, and forward-thinking data strategy are just as crucial as the latest algorithms. Ben's stories and frameworks offer a roadmap for anyone aiming to make AI a practical driver of growth and ROI. If you found this episode valuable, please follow, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. And don't forget to share this conversation with a colleague or friend in private equity, enterprise leadership, or the tech ecosystem. I'm Frank Scarpelli, and this has been Private Capital Insiders. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.